Buckle up, folks. We have an absolute burner. You're going to need to put your thinking cap on, use your big brain, because we are going to dive into ground contact times as it applies to the most elite jumpers in the entire world. That is what we're talking about. Isaiah and I did a lot of prep for this specific podcast. So, what we're going to do is we're going to pull up jumps, we're going to look at ground contact times, and then we're going to look at the flight times. Why is this relevant, you may ask? Well, the shorter the ground contact time on a given collision, the more elastic that collision. So if you're a human versus a deer, for example, and you're really squishy on the ground for a long time, that means your tendons are losing a lot of energy in the form of heat, and they're not efficient as a spring. Versus if you
Deer's
are,
going to eat you.
yeah, and the deer will eat you.
If you're not elastic enough, the deer's going to catch you.
Yeah. And the deer is very springy on and off the ground, very short ground contact times, very long tendons, and the tendons are able to deform and store a lot of energy very quickly and then dissipate that. Same thing's true in, I think, elite athletes, and we can get into the Titan conversation, but I have many thoughts about this. So let's get into it, Isaiah. Go ahead. Let's share some jumps and let's look at some.
Let's play a little guessing game.
A guessing
John,
game.
I'm gonna show you some jumps, and you got to guess the flight time and the ground contact time.
Okay, I think I can do this.
All right. First up,
Let's see where we're at.
We got Cole Satnam doing a high check.
Tottenham.
All
right, so he's 5. That's probably a 8. He's getting his head close to the rim. He's 5. What is he? 5'9"?
Yes, 5'10" in shoes, I believe.
44-inch jump. He's probably looking at 8'9", 85. Ground contact time for Cole. He's probably like 295, 310.
He is point.
I lost. This is in milliseconds, so just
907 seconds.
Okay, I guess 880, 890.
And 0.288 on the ground contact.
Okay, so I was a little long with my guess on the ground contact time, and I was a little low on the height. Oh, CJ? Yeah, this man. This is like 265 ground contact time. Grabs the rim. I don't know how he lands. It's kind of hard to tell. I'd say he's like 9.3, around there, 9.2, 9.3.
Flight time 0.923. Ground contact time 0.276.
Bro, I almost got that perfectly.
All right, now let's look at. I actually want to compare. We have two.
Okay, so let this be known. CJ jumped higher and he had shorter ground contact time relative to Cole.
Yeah.
Now this is Isaiah.
So this is my
all your flight times. Jump. I know what this is.
But the viewers might not.
0.963, and your ground contact time was 267.
The flight time was actually 0.98.
0.98 on that?
Yep.
Damn, I didn't realize that was such a massive jump. Okay. So 0.98.
And ground contact times 267. Then we have Dax.
Oh, wait, so ground contact time was the same as CJ's. Almost.
Yeah.
Like marginally faster or the same?
Mm-hmm.
It was the same?
It was a little faster.
So marginally faster and a way bigger jump. All right. So then we got Dak. In the threes, 320, 310.
His was. And then
his flight time 957.
957 was flight time. Ground contact time was. I lost you, Dak. Oh, 0.326.
So I was really close on that one. I'm getting better as I see more of these. So for perspective, he had higher, not as high as Isaiah's 50. Wait, pause this. Not as high as Isaiah's 50-inch jump in flight time. Mind you, how you land plays a big part of this, but you can kind of just generally, if you're in the 9.5s, you're probably close to 50. If you're 9.5s to 9.6s, you're close to 50. If you're anything over 9.6s, like 9.7 and up, you're probably well over 50. And then your ground contact times are going to be really accurate here, but Dax was way longer on the ground, but his flight time was like longer than anyone, ground contact time. So he's spending a lot more time on the ground, but his flight time is relatively similar to Isaiah's on some of his jumps, 50-inch jumps.
Yeah. Now we have, I forgot his name, but Chinese dunker who's insane at 360 scoops.
Oh, it's huge. That
Massive
flight
jump.
times 9. That flight times 9.5 change 9.6, 9.61 to 9.55 in that range. I'd say it's like 9.62. I think is his flight time there. It was a huge jump. You can just tell. And then the ground contact time. Ooh, wait, play it again. He's probably 278, 280, 280, 282. That's my guess. 282.
So he was 0.955 flight time.
0.955. What did I say?
Yep.
0.961. That was a good guess.
Yeah. So definitely, 48 to 50 in there somewhere.
Yeah, he's holding the rim, so that's going to elevate the flight time for sure. But
Yeah, he's
and
my
then
height, by the way. Like, we're like the exact same
okay,
height.
and then ground contact time. What did I say? 273,
So
275.
his is actually pretty slow.
Oh,
Not as
really?
slow as Dax. Yeah, his is 317.
Go back. Let
Something
me
I
see this.
realized that the guys that have longer flight times, they don't get knee to knee. So see how he's hitting the ground, and then that foot's on
Yeah,
the
that
ground.
makes sense. That makes sense.
And then same with Dak versus someone like me and CJ are actually. Oop, that's not CJ. Let me. Oh, CJ's jump is over here. Oh, my thing's glitching.
It's all right. It's all right. Just let it. I see what you're saying
There we
though.
go. All right, there we
But
go.
for the
Now I can
viewers,
fix
for the
CJ.
viewers.
So now for CJ's, look at how close together. Mind you, the Chinese dunker he hit like right here. Like that left leg was already on the ground versus CJ, he's
CJ
hitting.
also hinges a lot.
Yeah. And then if you look at where's my 50.5-inch jump? I'm very similar to CJ. It's like CJ, but with not as much hinge. Like, I'm more upright, but look at, like, we're planting those two legs way closer together in terms of the timing.
Yeah.
And then
I
if
agree
you
with
look
that.
at Dax was a longer flight or longer ground contact time. Oh, actually, look at that.
It's
Knee to
crazy.
knee.
Yeah. Keep going. He just amortizes a long time, man.
That is weird. So Dak is jumping like me and CJ, but amortizing way longer.
I think it has to do with the running velocity more than anything else.
He's pretty slow. Like,
Yep. He like
yeah.
walks in.
So would you say the ground contact time? Actually, let's look at the
Both.
longest
I
ground
think it's
contact
both of
time.
what you said. So like Ryan's is really long. I just looked at this one, so I know it. His flight times, it was 0.91, 0.908 or 0.92 or something. This is a
92.
48-inch jump. And then his ground contact time is like 320 or something, 330.
No, 362.
Oh God. All right. So
Is
he's
there a
basically
full speed one? Is
walking
there
in.
full speed?
No, I think it might. I'm not sure here actually.
Oh yeah, they're all slow mo.
Yeah, so he runs really slow though. Like he basically walks in and just does a penultimate step.
Yeah.
And then I don't know how he does. Yeah, does he need a knee? Yeah, he need a knee. But he
Not quite.
just
Not quite.
he's close though.
Yeah.
And he just lowers a lot. Like look how low he is. Watch how much his knees bend. He's
Yeah.
just really low and he rolls his knees forward like he just amortizes over a long time. So running velocity seems to be the biggest thing, and then how low you
Determiner.
are and how low you are, which is in line with high jump. And so this is goes into a really
Oh,
long.
and just I feel like people will be curious. Kilgannon, the highest height check we found of his, 961 flight time, 0.284 ground contact time. So he's in that probably 49 to 50 range, and he amortizes similarly to CJ and I.
And then I know that Daniel Guido's was like 220 or something like that. His was crazy fast. And he had like a
Yeah.
47, 48-inch vertical. So this is something I've looked at for years because I've always looked at Isaiah. I used to think ground contact time was like one of the biggest indicators of success in jumping. And then I looked at my own and it just kind of convoluted things when I was like, what? This isn't like adding up. So one of the things that I've long said is ground contact time is very the intra rate of reliability is good to look at, meaning like from person to person over time, longitudinally, you can maybe make some inferences. But when you're just looking at person to person, it doesn't necessarily work for 2-foot jumping, because you see those examples where you'll have a DAC that's, on the ground for 320 milliseconds and jumping 50.5, and you'll have Isaiah on the ground for 260. And that's a long time. That's a huge, huge discrepancy between time intervals for a jump. Like in 1-foot jumping and unilateral, you would never see a discrepancy like that. I mean, maybe
We
you
also
would with
have
a power jumper versus like a speed jumper, but like 2-foot jump strategies are relatively similar. So what were you
we
going to say?
we also have this. This is from our THP community, and I asked everybody what their ground contact times and their verticals. And you get some interesting thing. They said if they were 1-footer or 2-footer. So here we have a 32-inch vert, 0.39 ground contact time, and this is more average verticals, right? We just looked at purely elite guys. 3.7 ground contact time, 30-inch vertical, 30 inches, 0.333, 42-inch vertical, 0.283, 33.3, 45 Joshua Bell, 305.
So like,
Um,
it's crazy.
so this one was interesting. Gene Perez, his approach, he's has one of the fastest run-ups I've ever seen. I might be able to find his jump
Yeah,
after this. I'll
we'll
stop
find it
sharing
later,
here.
but
Yeah, dude, this was the lowest ground contact time where I've seen from a guy that's lower than a 40-inch vert.
so this is kind of what I was saying. I think the run-in velocity and how much you lower is the biggest determinant of that. So if
Yeah,
you're really low, you're going to have a really long ground contact time, and if you're running relatively slower, you're going to have a really long ground contact time. That pretty much coincides with what you see in high jump. Power jumpers have really long ground contact times compared to speed jumpers. That's not always, but generally. And the reason why is because they don't have as high of a run of velocity, generally speaking. There are exceptions to the rule, don't get me wrong, but like Fabian, for example, his ground contact time is 220, and
yeah,
he's a massive, massive power jumper with probably a 45-inch vertical. The same jumper, or the same high jumper height, you could say, like another 233 jumper, they could run in around close to 8 meters per second, and they might be on the ground for 180 milliseconds. That's 40. What is that? 10, 20% difference. That's huge. 20% difference is
yeah,
massive. You're not talking small margins like 20% for perspective in terms of jump height. You're looking at, what is that? Like 10%. That's like an 8-inch difference in jump height. You know what I mean? And if you're an elite guy, that's just massively different. So, in my lens of things, I've never really looked at it as like a determinant of your success. I think that generally your tendon properties, your jump technique, etc., you're probably going to fall in a given category, assuming your max effort. And then what you want to do is generally see how that changes over time. And what I do think happens is that as guys learn to control that speed and they learn to take that momentum upwards, generally you'll see ground contact times go down. That's not always the case, but generally I think you see a trend downwards for a given jumper longitudinally over years. Their
yeah.
ground contact time will go down. It's
So
not something you want to force, though, I don't think.
what
It's just
I'm what
they
I'm
add more momentum
gathering
into the approach.
what I'm gathering from that is ground contact time isn't something you should seek to minimize. Like I shouldn't go out and be like, if I get this lower, I'm gonna jump higher. It's more a result of it's a sign of other things improving. So
Ground contact time is a product. It is not a cause. It is a, what is it? Was that cause and effect or whatever?
yeah.
It is an
Like it's not
effect,
an
not
it's
a
an effect, it's
cause.
not a
It's an
cause.
effect,
Yeah.
not a cause. The cause of ground contact times being shorter are that you're running faster, you have very good tendons or better tendons, your rate of force development is better, maybe you are coordinated and you're contracting muscles earlier, which is, you can't control that necessarily. That's subconscious, and it's happening at a level that is not or not, what would you call that, volitional. It's non-volitional, and it's, yeah, it's an effect of all of the other things that go correctly, or are correct, right? You're running very fast, you're very low, you're very powerful. Those are the things that determine your ground contact time. You can look at ground contact time to tell you maybe about yourself. It's going to tell you things about yourself. Maybe you can make inferences about it in terms of, okay, my ground contact time on this jump was really, really slow versus really, really fast. What does that mean? Okay, well, that means you probably were running faster on the day, and that means that you're relatively stiffer in terms of your stiffness if it's the same jump height. Uh, okay, well, what does that even mean? Could be readiness just on the day. So that's why it's like within a couple months, I don't really think it means much. But when you're looking at like a 43-inch jump in 2017 versus a 50-inch jump in 2024, 6 years later, like in Isaiah's case, or 7 years later, or 2025, I think it's really informative in that sense. So like in
That's what
Isaiah's
happened to
case,
me.
go
I
ahead.
have a couple jumps where I think I might have sent them to you, or I sent them in chat somewhere, but the first time I ever, like, hung on the rim, or one of the first times I ever hung on the rim, which is probably like a 32-inch jump or something like that, I was at 0.333. Then around the time where I had a 40-inch jump where I could, like, East Bay and that type of thing, those were my best dunks. That was a 300 millisecond jump. And then my first 50.5 jump was like 0.28 something ground contact time. And then 2 years later, when I jumped arguably a little bit higher, probably an inch, it was probably a 51-inch jump, 51.5. That was 0.267 on ground contact time.
So you got shorter ground contact times, maybe the same jump heights in some cases.
Yeah.
What was your height check?
Uh the height check was 0.971. Or which one are you talking about on that day where I
Highest height
tested
check ever.
50.5?
Your highest height check ever.
Um I actually don't know. I can run it
I think it was
real quick.
0.983. The
It was something
2022
like, oh
height
yeah,
check
that flight
was
time. I
0.983.
thought you meant the ground contact
Oh, I
time.
don't know what the ground contact time is, but I would be curious to see it.
Yeah, so I'll do it right now.
We'll
There it is.
pause for a brief intermission. And we're back. Isaiah, we time skipped. What was it?
0.982 on the flight time.
Okay.
So
The
my
highest
highest jump
ever.
ever,
And
for
then,
sure.
or at least flight time. Highest flight time. Could have landed lower,
Yeah.
but go ahead.
And then ground contact time was 272, and this is what the jump looked like.
272. Okay,
Yeah.
so 272 is faster than your 50.5-inch jump, slower than your 50.5 vertex.
It's a little faster than my first 50.5 jump and a tiny bit slower than my 50.5-inch jump last year, which was probably more like 51 or 51.5.
So we're looking at this kind of in between, and this is kind of marginal. Like these are marginal changes, but it seems like your sweet spot is between like 265 and 275. That's where
Yeah.
you kind of fall, for this case. And the run up speed was this is pretty
Those
fast,
are
not
high
crazy.
adrenaline. I'm full sending it.
Yeah, exactly. But I wouldn't say it's like you're sprinting into it. You know what I mean? You're just
Yeah.
paced. It's very rhythmic. It's a very rhythmic approach. So yeah, I mean, in conclusion, I would say you can look at these changes over time. I would encourage you to do that and see if you notice anything. Generally, you're going to see that you probably have an ideal ground contact time that again is in effect as a result of a lot of other variables.
Let
And I
me ask
think
you a
over
question real
time,
quick.
it probably goes down for better jumps because you're running faster.
Is there any training application in your opinion?
I don't think I think it's no, not really, because it doesn't determine the training laws. The training laws stay the same. The training consequences of that are such that you're going to go general specific. You're going to finish the year the most specific stuff towards the end, and then you're going to back off.
Yeah.
Maybe potentially it determines which plyos or how you do plyos. It might change that. It might change if you want to go, and lean into what Randy and Rolf have been doing. It may change your lens on which exercises are specific or non-specific, because at that point you have a lot more options. If you're going to say, look, ground contact times for guys that are jumping 50 are between 260 or 250 and 330. I mean, it basically gives you a lot more of a window of what would be considered in the specific in the weight room, right? I
Yeah.
mean, 300 milliseconds is a long time to generate force. So TPVs can be zero point 0.3 to whatever, and it's relatively specific. So yeah, I think it maybe changes it in that lens. But here's the other thing: is like that's just concentric TPV. So the thing about concentric TPV is that's half of the time that jump was happening. Like it's possible that you were eccentric for a brief period, isometric for a brief period, and concentric for a period, right? But let's say
Yeah.
that the period of time you were actually concentric during that jump, if it was 270, let's say that most of the time you were concentric because that's what good athletes do, then maybe you're 180 milliseconds, maybe 200. I don't think you're eccentric the whole time, or sorry, concentric the whole time, and definitely not all the muscle fascicles. So even if that's the case, you're still like way shorter. And then in sprinting, it's like you could be isometric or concentric almost the entire time. So it's like a little bit different because as you get those longer intervals, it's almost impossible for you to have a solely concentric action. That's not going to happen unless you're like under 160 milliseconds probably, or 180, 160 probably. In that case, maybe it's all isometric or all concentric because it's almost impossible to have a full active stretch shortening cycle in those cases, in my opinion, for elite athletes. So, it's like you could probably build in some specificity in TPV exercises in that 200 millisecond range, or I wouldn't go much shorter than that. Maybe like 200, 180. But the thing is, in the weight room, that's so fast. Like
Yeah.
and then the knee
Not
and hip joint
specific.
angles are non-specific at that
And
point.
to
You
be
can't, you
specific,
basically can't. You'd
you
have to
can
have
only, the
such
only
light
thing is,
loads. You're basically doing a plyo at that point.
yeah. Like to have the specific joint angle and TPVs is jumping. It's 2-foot jumping. Like
Like
that's like,
you could do a squat jump. Like I don't even know. You need a collision, and at that point, yeah, it's just like a plyo. Like you're doing barbell squat jumps really light, and you're just jumping. Or like step ups. You could probably get 200 to. I mean, it depends on how you're going to view it. Like let's say you're using 200, 300 milliseconds. For TPV, you could definitely get that with probably like an 8 to 12-inch step up or something, which is relatively high. And in that case, you'd really have to hit the box hard. The loads would have to be optimized to hit those TPV times. You'd have to play around with some stuff. Another big one that they do is like a step down where they'll use a side box, similar things. You're probably going to be in that 12-inch to probably like 8-inch range, maybe
yeah.
6. And then if you're looking at like squat jumps and things like that, like barbell squat jumps, yeah, I mean, you're just going to do standard squat jumps. And you're just doing plyos. Cleans, it's variable because it TPVs are off the floor, don't really apply. Off a box, you might be able to get relatively high, but then you're probably pulling from like above the knee, pretty high above the knee. And in that case, you're getting a double knee bend, which kind of changes things as well. So maybe you could bump the TPV
Yeah.
times up quite a bit. I think that for cleans, our TPV times are what, like 0.4 generally or something like that?
Off the floor or on the
From the
double knee
floor, off
bend?
the floor.
Off the floor, I've been getting, I think, in the 0.5s on
Okay.
my TPVs.
I think
Double knee bend is around
off the
point.
box, I'm around 3.4. Off the box, I'm around 3.4.
Yeah.
I don't know. You're probably similar to me. We generally fall in the same kind of range.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's higher, but TPV is weird because that first pull, you're setting up the second pull. So it's
Yeah.
like if you really just want to do
Almost
it from
doesn't
a
count.
very forced, what's that?
It's like it almost doesn't count. Like,
Exactly. Yeah. Like borderline doesn't count. So yeah, it just kind of convolutes things. And it makes things really complex and you have to kind of really think about it a lot. Right now, I'm testing a 21-week microcycle, 21 microcycles consecutively, subsequently, following this progression with one of my high jumpers and then a different high jumper who's also, they're both well trained. One's elite, one's not elite, but they're both towards their genetic ceiling. So that's kind of what I'm saying is like, okay, you're both near your genetic ceiling. You've both done very different things.
yeah.
Let's see who gets the better result. And I'm going to run them side by side using two different approaches. One is very TPV dominant and determined. The other one is not. More traditional long conjugate sequence systems. So we're going to see for 1 foot jumping. For sprinting, I think it works incredibly well. But for vertical jumps off 1 foot, I'm not fully convinced yet. I'm trying to determine what the results are going to kind of indicate. I know long sequence systems don't generally work for sprint times for elite guys. In my opinion, it just doesn't work super well. From what I've seen, if you run under like 10.8, you kind of got to start shifting your training style. And for guys slower than that, long conjugate sequence systems, old school stuff, multis, it worked really, really well. But then as you shift down in the ground contact times, yeah, I think that TPV stuff works really well. I've seen it work really well. But Fabian just hit 10 meters per second in a fly. That's fast. That's like Long jumpers hit like maybe 10.9, like the guys that really pop up high in the air. They might hit 11 meters per second on the board. Fabian's a 6'9" high jumper hitting 10 meters per second at 220. Guys that hit 11 meters per second are they're sprinters. They're 10.5 or sub 10.5 sprinters.
The other thing is jumping as much as dunkers do. Like, you're checking so many of those boxes off too. Like, I think that's why we can train with high volume and still get better. And like, it's because you're the unchecked off box from jumping a lot is increasing force. Like, how much force can you generate? How the hypertrophy of the muscle, how big that fiber is, and I think I've just seen it work too many times. Like,
Yeah,
the guy does high volume.
it's hard to argue with it. You know what I mean? I don't even say it's like high volume to me because like the working sets are relatively low. I've upped it to 4 sets of working, but that's like in very rare cases where the athlete's work capacity is really high.
Yeah.
I've also done the opposite. So it's just, yeah, it's different strokes for different folks, and you really have to just test things, and that's what we're always doing. We're always testing and trying things, and really experimenting. I think Isaiah and I are big on that. We always like to, specifically me, but Isaiah is willing to also test things if there's good rationale behind it. I don't usually do the things I would do for myself with him.
Yeah.
I'm not going to have him do 8 weeks of eccentrics.
And
I will do that.
it's such uncharted territory, like elite 2-foot jumping training where it's not a team sport or you don't have that variable, that I don't think it's correct to make any assumptions on your training. If you're not playing a sport, you're just trying to jump higher, it's incorrect to make a conclusion based off of a study that's on non-elite athletes where they're not jumping once a week. You know what I mean? Like they just squatted 3 times a week for 4 weeks, and then you make a conclusion based off of your jump training where it's completely different. You're at a different level. And I think at the point where we're at, it does come down to a lot of testing. Like, we're essentially testing uncharted territory, stuff that hasn't been peer reviewed and stuff like that.
Yeah, and we can't necessarily control for variables quite as well, but we have a lot of considerations. It's like when you get to the end of the paper and they're like, "Oh, here are some considerations for why we got these results and some variables that might have convoluted the results." It's like we kind of do that subconsciously and we account for those like, "Oh, well, you did sleep poorly last night. You didn't take as much caffeine and we did train like this and this and this." And it's like, "Okay, well, that could explain a lot of the discrepancy we're seeing here." So, it's also repeatability. Like that's a scientific method is it repeatable? And there's certain things we've tested and we're like, it's repeatable. I've tested this over and over again, and guys consistently respond well to this. And then there's things where it's like, this is not repeatable. And it's really confusing and it's really convoluted, and it kind of just makes you think twice about things. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of my lens on things. I feel like it's a good place to close it off here. We're closing in on the 30-minute mark, which I know is fairly long for a podcast, but hopefully this was really informative for you guys. If you're interested in getting coaching from us and diving into what is really evidence-based practice at the highest level, both taking the most current research and applying it the best way possible, and then just testing it in real time on other athletes before we, again, test it over and over again, is the results repeatable? And then we give you that product. It's always improving. The product's always improving. You want that? Definitely go and sign up for coaching. I'm very confident. I don't want THPstrength to be this kind of watered down brand. It really is. When people hear THPstrength, I want to think like, oh, that's the most elite of elite programming right there. And I stand by that. I really am proud of that accomplishment. So thanks for watching, guys. And yeah, we'll see you guys tomorrow. Happy Tuesday.
Peace out.
Bye.